There's plenty of pressure surrounding the Indianapolis Colts for the 2025 season. So, who has the most? Can they answer the mounting expectations? And which players do you, the fans, think have to take on the most? Well, let's talk about it. Welcome to the Horseshoe Huddle Podcast presented by Indianapolis Colts on SI. My name is Drake Wally, deputy editor for the site and co-host of the show. And of course, I'm joined by Noah Gebert, fellow analyst of the site and co-host of this podcast. Noah, we are approaching a pivotal training camp, but everyone's talking about a certain someone who fans will get to him. I know you're dying to hear about him, but there are a lot of players on this team that are facing pressure. There's coaches that are facing pressure. There's front office members that are facing pressure. What do you make of all of this? Because it's such a pivotal season.
Yeah.
There needs to be a collective effort here. It's not just on any one guy.
Yeah, and we were going through making this list. I think there's pretty much an argument you can throw out there for most guys on this roster, especially those in starting roles right now, of who's going to face pressure in 2025 just because of the past few years that the Colts have had, their lack of success. And there's a lot at stake for the coaching staff, for the front office. If things don't go well, there could be some massive turnover, and that could have huge implications for literally everybody on the roster, not just the people that would be getting the boot on Black Monday at the end of the season. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of pressure on a lot of these guys, but I wanted to go through and kind of single out some of these individuals that for sure we know there's a lot riding on this because of whether it's lack of success in the past or just stepping up into new roles, whatever it might be. So yeah, we've got a good list of maybe 8 names or so that we'll go over of people that we're just going to be watching a little bit more closely than usual.
Well, and when you're dealing with so much uncertainty, not just at quarterback, you're dealing with uncertainty on what's going to happen with the front office if winning ways aren't established. What's going to happen with the defense? You just got yourself a new coordinator. Well, what happens if the defense falls apart and the whole team finishes 6-11, 7-10? Just a lot of questions that have to be answered this year. But what we're going to do is we're just going to dive right into it. So obviously it's regarding the Colts and not just players. There are also front office members and coaches that are facing a lot of pressure. What do you make, Noah, of this year in particular? Because of course, throwing Anthony Richardson aside here, you bring in Shane Steichen. You expect him to put the offense to new heights. Gus Bradley, he's supposed to be the guy, to help a defense. And now you're dealing with Steichen going into year 3, Louis Anarumo going into year 1. And a lot of these players have been with the franchise long enough. Of course, you make some good moves in the offseason, but what do you make of the 2025 season in general and all the pressure really hovering over the franchise?
Yeah, it starts from the top down when you've got one new ownership coming out. We used to just think it was going to be Chris Ballard down. I think it's even taken a step further with the Irsay sisters stepping in as new ownership, trying to make impact in year 1. So you've got pressure on them trying to do something, turn things or right the ship, as you'd say in their first year. And then you've got Chris Ballard in his unbelievable 9th year and that lifespan that he has that I think's just gone beyond comprehension of most Colts fans and most people that follow the NFL. Just really his need to turn things around. And yeah, you mentioned that coaching staff and Shane Steichen, and really it just all kind of flows from there. When you've got a head coach that might be on a hot seat, then literally every assistant coach, positional coach, whoever might be on that coaching staff is also kind of going to be in flux. And then that trickles down to the players as well. We mentioned we saw this turnover, especially in the defensive back room here, when Louis Anarumo came in and made some changes at the defensive backfield. When you've got new coaches in a position group on one side of the ball, you see changes. When you get a new coach as the head coach, a new general manager, then you see changes all over the roster. So I think that's something that you could expect if things don't go the right way.
Yeah, and of course, it's all going to hinge first and foremost on the most important position in football.
Yeah.
And for the Colts, that's no different. And yes, we're going to go ahead and get to it. It is Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones. Now, we'll go ahead and start with Daniel Jones here because we always talk about Anthony Richardson, and it's going to get so unbelievably old when, I'm at training camp. And it's real funny because we sit here, Noah, and we say, well, quarterback is going to get boring. But I'm pretty confident my eyes are just going to be watching the
Yeah.
quarterbacks. But tell me a little bit about, they bring in Daniel Jones. A lot of people are talking about, and we have too, never been surrounded by more talent. He's got that veteran aspect. He's got a lot of advantages in this quarterback battle. But man, he's facing just as much pressure as Richardson in a
Yeah.
different way. Tell me a little bit about this guy, getting brought in on a $14 million 1-year deal.
Yeah, I mean, just to start off, we can't have this topic of this podcast be people under most pressure and not talk about the quarterbacks. I think the conversation just is going to start with them no matter what. I think pretty much every conversation you're going to have about the Colts throughout the offseason is going to start with the quarterback. So you're talking about Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones, and when we're starting with Daniel Jones and him coming in, just kind of the bust of a career that we've been kind of outright in saying that when we were talking about Daniel Jones and his career with the New York Giants to this point. Ended up being a bust, a draft bust from where he was at, 6th overall, and then that short stint with the Vikings, not a lot of playing time. So really, this is a guy who's just trying to resurrect his career and prove that he belongs. I mean, you're starting right now. You're trying to go for a starting job. I think he's got even more on the line than that to prove that he's a rosterful backup as well. There's just a lot going on from him. We've talked about Anthony Richardson and how this might be his last shot to make an impression as a starter, but in reality, he's going to get second, third chances, whatever. Having the pedigree that he has, the age that he has, even if things don't work out with the Colts this year and he ends up moving on, he's probably going to get another shot to at least compete somewhere in the NFL at some point. But if Daniel Jones comes out this year and is just a flop and doesn't end up being a good starter or loses the job to Anthony Richardson or whatever, I think that might be the end of Daniel Jones' really long-term hopes to find a starting job in the NFL.
Yeah, and Daniel Jones is an interesting quarterback because you look at his stats, right? They're not awful by any means, but a couple things about Jones that are good is that he does, outside of his rookie year, I'm looking at it right here. I mean, outside of his rookie year and maybe the last couple where things really fell off the rails, he takes care of the football. I mean, I'm looking at his rushing here, and he does have an outrageous number of fumbles. He's got 50, but 29 of those, 19 in his rookie year, but 29 of those came in his first 2 seasons. So he does take care of the football. He does operate within the offense that is being schemed up. So a great example of that is 2022 when he played his best football. He only needed to throw 15 touchdowns, man. He didn't have to go out there and be some otherworldly presence. Downsides to Daniel Jones. We've preached it, and I still believe it, that he had nearly nothing outside of Saquon Barkley in New York. But my goodness, 3-9, 5-9, 4-7, 1-5, 2-8. And those last 2 were from the last 2 seasons. So he finished his time in New York with only 16 games played, 3-13 with 13 picks, 10 touchdowns. But that one season, that one magical season, was the only one he finished with a winning record. So do you think that it was more on the Giants than it was on Jones? Or do you think that, I know that it's hard to say in this new offense, but your opinions, just the tape you've seen, the proof you've seen, do you think that Daniel Jones can have like a Sam Darnold-like season where he just blows up and all that potential he may have had finally shows its head?
Yeah, I mean, that's the bet the Colts are making. That's what they're hoping. I don't think that question can really be answered whether it was Daniel Jones or whether it was the Giants until we see what happens this season and we see whether he has some success in a new scheme with a new supporting cast that's maybe got a little bit more talent than what he was working with the Giants in the past or the last couple years of his career there. I mean, that's a bet that it's hard to make. You have to make it just because of the position you were in as the Colts, needing to bring in for some competition for Anthony Richardson, who was a guy you have high hopes for, but just you can't flat out hand him the reins anymore. You have to give him some competition and at least threaten to hand the job over to somebody else who's going to be working hard for it. And Daniel Jones is going to be that. If nothing else can be said for Daniel Jones, no one's really questioned that work ethic and his desire to get better and his want to lead the team and setting a good example. But you just haven't seen it on the field. And that play in the field hasn't equated to wins, and that's kind of what needs to happen. You talk about the Sam Darnold year that he had last season. I think that's, you talked a lot about throughout the offseason about Anthony Richardson. We all talked about Anthony Richardson and him training with Josh Allen's former or his former trainer, and becoming the next Josh Allen and making that jump in terms of inaccuracy. But we always had to remind ourselves that, hey, Josh Allen is the exception to the rule. He's not the rule. I think you kind of have to remind yourself also. I mean, these revitalizations of quarterback projects don't happen that often, and you can kind of consider Sam Darnold to be the exception to the rule the same way Josh Allen was. So you can't bank on that to be the case with Daniel Jones. I think if you're making that bet, you're looking at less than a 50-50 shot of him coming out and redeeming his career and being a full-time quality starter going forward in his career. It doesn't happen that often, but the Colts were certainly in a position where they were willing to take that risk and had to take that risk.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because yes, okay, Sam Darnold wasn't necessarily surrounded, I guess, by incredible talent. I mean, they did give him Le'Veon Bell apparently at the end of his prime, so but it is a little bit of a stretch, okay, to just because once someone does it, everyone thinks that the next quarterback can do it.
Yeah.
And Baker Mayfield, okay, people have talked about, well, Sam Darnold and Baker Mayfield. I don't like those two even being compared because Baker Mayfield won in Cleveland, right? Like he was loaded with talent around him, but he still went out there and balled, and the Browns just, did typical Browns stuff and didn't keep him around.
Yeah.
And then he kind of bounces around, and then he goes over to the Rams, plays one random game, a couple random games, whatever, wins there with Sean McVay. That's a different quarterback, all right? And now he's in the right system where he's just balling out, looking like a true number one overall pick. Daniel Jones is not Baker Mayfield, all right? He also is not – I mean, I don't want to say the Colts don't have a lot of talent, but he doesn't have Justin Jefferson out there, okay? He doesn't have T.J. Hawkinson, at least not yet. The Vikings – have a guy who is kind of like Shane Steichen in the quarterback aspect as far as coaching in Kevin O'Connell. So we'll see what Sam Darnold does in Seattle. But, I mean, there's no given. I mean, Pete Carroll's not there anymore. Yeah. DK Metcalf's not there anymore. That's Tyler Lockett's gone. That'll be interesting to see if it's just a one-hit wonder. But, I mean, I think Daniel Jones is, we'll go back to it. There's no excuses. He is surrounded literally by the best team he's ever seen. Mm-hmm. I think that Brian Daboll is a good coach, but I think that Shane Steichen is more akin to helping a quarterback who's struggled and hasn't been able to win. So that's going to be interesting. But Daniel Jones, like you mentioned, we can end with this. Do you think if he just – let's say that Richardson starts, right? In fact, you know what? No, let's say Jones starts. He goes out there, first 3 games, 1-2, 0-3. He can't stay on the field. They yank him. Or Richardson outright starts and Jones is the backup starting the season. Do you think that's it for him as a starter?
I think you have to. You mentioned he doesn't have any excuses in terms of. I mean, I know that the offensive talent for the Indianapolis Colts isn't like top 5 in the NFL. Nobody's putting their receiving rankings in line with some of these other top guys. Or offensive line has just always kind of been steady. But I mean, they're dealing with 2 new starters. There's definitely. It's not Pro Bowl talent at every position. They're not completely stacked on the offensive side of the ball, but I think it is a solid group that he's working with that doesn't really have a ton of weaknesses. And a well-rounded out receiving core, a pretty solid offensive line for the most part. Hopefully those second-year guys can step in. But yeah, those excuses are gone, and he's the guy that he's battling against is a guy who's been benched in the past, has trouble staying healthy, staying on the field, was benched for off-the-field stuff in terms of just 9 to 5 or professionalism, work ethic in the building, out the building kind of stuff. And in terms of just his inaccuracy and his inconsistency with the offense, Daniel Jones chose the Colts because he thought this would be his best opportunity to start and liked his odds going against Anthony Richardson. I think all those things stacked in his favor if he still doesn't come out on top and prove that he can be a starting quarterback. I don't really see any other team giving him another shot at that unless somebody's really hurting and really desperate. And even in that situation, they would be bringing him in to compete with somebody else and not outright giving him the job. So yeah, I think he's kind of on his last legs in his NFL career, and I think he did choose wisely in choosing the Indianapolis Colts in the situation he's in now.
Yeah, I mean there was no better spot. I mean he wasn't out here like I got that one, that one, that one, that one, that one. It's not like he had a bunch of
Yeah.
offers, right? But I mean, he could have stayed in Minnesota. He could have competed with JJ McCarthy, and nope. He felt like the freakish most athletic quarterback ever taken, the fourth overall guy who has all this potential. He thought he could beat him out over JJ McCarthy. By the way, a guy who has his skills more than JJ McCarthy. So that tells you everything you need to know about Richardson and how he's done so far. So we'll jump into the comments here real quick. Andy Racer, each aging quarterback since Luck was asked the same thing, that this was their time. It was wishful thinking, but we never have an 8-7 or 8-8, 8-9 NFL record with a 23-year-old QB waiting to let it rip either. That's fair. The Colts, in short, they've tried very hard to just do quarterback patching, and it's not worked out well. And then the last one here that we'll get to, and then we'll get to Rich later. What's up, guys? I finally caught a live stream. I love the show. Been a Colts fan for a long time, and I live just south of South Bend, so it's my hometown team. Go Colts. Justin, I live in South Bend, so that's pretty cool that you live up here, man. So happy that you were able to join us. And then before we get to Anthony Richardson here, I have to address this because this guy was commenting in our last show. Yo, the losers are in from Patriots 12, 45-7. Two things. Number one, that's a decade ago that you're talking about. Two, the Colts are 3-1 in the last four. So, hey, you know what? Respect. Thank you for watching, though. Appreciate you tuning in regardless. But yeah, the next one we're going to get to, obviously, we'll make it quick because we've just gone over this so much. But Anthony Richardson, Noah, this is pretty much it. He's shown precious little, unfortunately, but that little has been incredible.
Yeah.
But what he's shown more of is just inconsistency. Of course, just it was a PR nightmare last year when he said, I'm tired. I'm not going to lie. Just a lot of things are concerning. And tell me a little bit more about the comment you mentioned. You said project quarterbacks are very hard to salvage. And he honestly, going into year 3, still looks like a project quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, and at the same time, though, you're recognizing he's brought more life into the team and more excitement into the fan base than any quarterback since Andrew Luck. You're trying to balance those two things of like, yeah, you mentioned those highs and lows. There's just way too many lows, but those highs are so fun to watch. That bomb in week 1 to Alec Pierce in the end zone. I mean, the trucking people into the end zone, or the 360 spike in the end zone. I mean, he's got the flash, he's got all that, but yeah, he just hasn't been consistent enough. In terms of one, staying on the field, and then two, his ability while he's on it, and his accuracy and his consistency in moving the offense. And I feel like every time I bring up Anthony Richardson, I bring up how the consistency with the offense isn't there, and how you get stuck into positions where your bad accuracy is forcing you into lower percentage throws because you miss those easy short passes, 1st and 10, 2nd and 10. You're now in 3rd and 10 where you're throwing the ball down the field even further, which is just compounding the problem. And I think that really started to affect his confidence, especially this past season. I think year 1, it was kind of rolling off his back a little bit because he was able to make some more of those flashy plays. There was a lot less pressure on him in year 1 than he's going to have going into this season. So, I mean, it's really pressure either creates diamonds or it makes you crumble. So we're going to see what happens with Anthony Richardson. I'm not willing to count him out at this point, but like we've said with Daniel Jones and how Sam Darnold maybe was the exception to the rule in this reclamation project, and it might be a lower than 50-50 chance that Daniel Jones ends up being the guy. I think you're having the same conversation about Anthony Richardson, where it's probably lower than a 50-50 chance that he ends up being the guy for you. But yeah, you spent the 4th overall pick on this guy. He's invigorated the fan base in a lot of ways. He's super exciting to watch. The highs are so fun. You're not going to give up on that for anything short of pretty much a sure playoff berth if you go with a different quarterback like Daniel Jones. So I think they're willing to ride with Anthony Richardson. If he shows any modicum of improvement over this past season, we just have to kind of see. And what really sucks about that is going into training camp. That comment that Rich had there, we'll probably hit later, but he was talking about like paying attention to these quarterback stats when we get into training camp, which is really rough for Anthony Richardson because I think those training camp stats are all going to be pretty much in favor of Daniel Jones, because where really Anthony Richardson really shines is when those pads come on, and he uses that 6'4", 250 whatever pound frame that he has, and he's bowling people over, and he's able to use his physicality that way. His game goes well beyond the 7-on-7 and the 11-on-11 no contact drills that we're going to be seeing through training camp. But that's really where he needs to show the improvement to get the chance to show everything else he has.
Yeah, and look, I'll just put a bow on it with this, and this is positivity and harsh, realism. He has shown only, unfortunately, in a couple games throughout his career. I think back to when he led the Colts back from being down against the Rams in his rookie season, takes them to overtime. Of course, Puka Nacua wins the game for the Rams, but you saw glimpses of what he can do when the pressure's on. And then last year, I go to mostly the New York Jets game. I mean, that's the game where he almost murdered a man just running over him at the goal line. I mean, he had over 60% completion percentage. He had 3 all-purpose touchdowns. He looked good.
Mm-hmm.
But outside of that, last year, any game Richardson played fully or didn't get knocked out of in the middle of the contest, the dude didn't go over 50% throwing. So there's so much there, but the harsh realism here is that it's the worst quarterbacking I've ever seen. And I'm not saying that lightly. I mean, the easy dump off, gimme throws that any professional college, high school quarterback almost should be able to hit. Richardson was sailing him, but he can hit that 65-yarder to Alec Pierce. So it's there. It's just weird with him because the simpler stuff is a big, big struggle for him. But yes, there's all the pressure on Anthony Richardson here. Teresa, very nice to see you. Thank you so much for joining. But yeah, so it's not all about Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones. We've got a couple of young guys here that are really going to be counted on to fill some big, big, big shoes, and that's center Tanner Bortolini and guard Matt Gonsalves. So we'll go ahead and start with Bortolini. Obviously, Ryan Kelly goes away in free agency, and really both the guys that they replaced went to the same team. What are your initial thoughts when you hear Tanner Bortolini and Matt Gonsalves' names? What are your initial thoughts? What did you see in their rookie seasons? Because, hey, they got some meaningful snaps last year.
Yeah, and we were going with guys who have the most pressure on them. Normally, I wouldn't say a second-year player is going to have a huge amount of pressure. There's other guys on this roster, Laiatu Latu, A.D. Mitchell, who could have a lot of pressure on them as second-year players, but really they're not being thrust into this position that Bortolini and Gonsalves are, where they're coming in to start pretty much every game at their position and replace some pretty talented people in Ryan Kelly and in Will Fries. So yeah, I mean, there's going to be pressure on because this is their opportunity, and they don't really have a ton of backup plans. I know Danny Pinter's been getting a lot of reps or splitting that in the first team with Bortolini, so he has a little bit of a job to earn. But I think there's some added pressure there also. Whereas in Gonsalves' case, there's really no competition for him at right guard, so he's kind of being left to his own devices. And on top of that, in Gonsalves, it's a position that he hasn't played since high school, really, where he got a few reps there at training camp in his rookie year with the Colts and throughout the preseason, a few reps. But he was pretty much exclusively working at guard once the season at tackle once the season got underway. So he really doesn't have a ton of experience in a position that he's being forced to be thrown in there, thrown to the Wolves in his second year, where maybe it's a little bit more beneficial to his skill set to have him inside. But I mean, we have to see when live bullets come flying if that's true or not.
Yeah, and some good things about Tanner Bortolini is last year we've mentioned this before, but I mean, he did play 351 offensive snaps. Yeah. 211 of those were pass. So a good percentage of his blocks and his assignments were pass blocking. The guy only had a penalty. He had no sacks allowed. I mean, he only allowed 2 quarterback hits. He looked like a guy not out of this world, right? He's also a rookie, but he did look like a guy that you could say that moldable ball of clay can potentially replace Ryan Kelly. And I'm telling you, the pressure is more on Tanner Bortolini because of who he's replacing. I mean, talking about a 4-time Pro Bowler, 9 years with the Colts, countless seasons where you're just like, Ryan Kelly, any given game day could be the best center. Now Tanner Bortolini fills that. And of course, Gonsalves played a crap ton of tackle last year, and he did it at both ends. 2 totally different assignments, by the way. And yet he was able to he looked really good in the run blocking game, which you expect with a guy that has his traits, 6'6", about 330, which is insane. But he struggled in pass blocking. And I think that you know, do you think that Gonsalves moving to the inside, you're going to have a little bit more help? You're not put out on an island like you mentioned in the last episode we had. That's what a tackle has to do. They're by themselves a lot. Do you think that he's going to excel a little bit more? Because one, he's got help, and two, I mean, he's a pretty fierce run blocker, and the Colts are going to run the crap out of the football.
Yeah, I think so. I think that when he was coming out of Pitt, when he was declaring for the draft, there was a lot of analysts considering him maybe being a better fit inside at guard. The Colts mentioned when they drafted him, they saw him having versatility inside and outside. It's just that he didn't get that opportunity just out of necessity and the injuries that happened along the offensive line last year. He was kind of forced to be out there and be that next man up at tackle at really both tackle spots. So didn't get a lot of opportunities to bump inside to guard. But the Colts must have liked what little that they saw in training camp in the preseason this past year and really are confident in the traits that he has and his ability to move inside. Because if they weren't, then it would just, you and Andrew Moore, to use a phrase that you guys used a lot, roster malpractice, is what it would be if you didn't feel confident that Gonsalves could go in there and start at guard, because you didn't bring in any competition for him. You still have Dalton Tucker in there at guard who played some but was an undrafted free agent that got thrown into the starting lineup and kind of proved to be not ready for that situation, which you can't blame him. That was never really the intention for what the Colts had, but that's what they had to do. And I mean, he's really the only other guy, unless you're considering whoever the loser is in the starting battle between Bortolini and Danny Pinter as competition for there at guard. Yeah, I mean, you have to feel confident if you're the Colts and Gonsalves. Otherwise, there's really no way to explain away the fact that you did not add any competition or any help or depth along the interior.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned that, because last year, you were leaning on Dalton Tucker to be your backup, okay? And he played good for a UDFA, but my goodness, he eventually regressed to a point where they said, "Hey, let's bring in Mark Glowinski."
Yeah.
Like, former Colt that got to deal with the Giants and by all regards was not good. So the Giants were like, "Hey, we tried, but that didn't work out." But yes, these are two guys that have immense pressure. They've got a lot of talent, though. That's the good news. And I think I'm a little bit more confident in Tanner Bortolini than I am Matt Gonsalves. And briefly, it's because Tanner Bortolini is insanely athletic. He has quicker feet. He just seems to be a fit. Gonsalves looked pretty decent given all the moving around he had to do last year. But man, that pass blocking is a concern. And yes, he was dealing with defensive ends last year. Now he's going to be dealing with defensive tackles.
Yeah.
And it's just like, we'll see. I think that might fit him better, but that's the one. He's got I think he's got a little bit more pressure just to perform, whereas Bortolini's got the pressure to try to replace a Colts legend who will be in the Ring of Honor.
Yeah, so, and I feel like the Colts kind of put centers, or Colts fans put centers on a pedestal with Jeff Saturday, Ryan Kelly, these kind of guys that have just come through in the past and been stalwarts for their guys. Andrew Luck didn't really have some rotation of Khaled Holmes and Jonathan Harrison and all those other names. So maybe there was a little bit of a sore spot there. But yeah, in terms of center, you want to have that position locked down. You kind of wish you had your quarterback position locked down with a young guy that could grow with him as well. But that's a different conversation.
Yeah, and when it's all said and done, you're talking about the general of the offensive line here. So outside of I know that we've heard that there's a competition between Pinter and Bortolini. No. Yeah. That they really need Bortolini to be that guy for now and in the future. So we're going to go ahead and jump to the next guy. Now, this is a guy who I know that he had some rough moments, right? But this was a dude that really had himself a hell of a season. I mean, by all regards, he had a hell of a season, best of his career, earned his first career Pro Bowl, linebacker Zaire Franklin. So, Noah, Zaire Franklin had the people didn't talk about how he led the league in tackles. They didn't talk about that he had 5 freaking forced fumbles as a linebacker. Those are, by the way, that's like Shaq Leonard type numbers right there. 5 forced fumbles. That's absolutely impressive as hell. 6 passes defended, 2 interceptions. For that, Zaire had 1 pick in 7 years or in 6 seasons. So The one thing that everyone was talking about, though, is how, they beat the Jaguars in a completely meaningless game. And he's so concerned with Pat McAfee not being there that he goes and shakes an imaginary hand of where he was sitting. This is a guy that is so important to the defense. Tell me a little bit about what you thought about Zaire Franklin, because at one point there were people that were like, you need to take that captain logo off your jersey.
Yeah, there was a lot of talk about that. A lot of talk about him giving up number 44 to Tyler Warren, an incoming rookie.
Get out of here.
A lot of pretty much just disrespect towards Zaire Franklin. And he did have a successful season last year. It was a really good season statistically. You mentioned all those things that leading the league in tackles, and everybody in the Colts fandom is talking about the missed tackles, which was a lot and unacceptable and needs to be lowered a little bit. But nationally, I think he was pretty well recognized as having a good year, and the Pro Bowl nod, I think, reflects that. Where I think the pressure comes is he's just the general of this defense, and he's the captain. He's the green dot. You get rid of his longtime running mate beside him in EJ Speed, and you're coming into a new defensive scheme and a new defensive coordinator. And you have to prove you can be the general of a completely new defense here with Lou Anarumo's scheme. And I think really the lack of production that the Colts defense had, and their tendency to kind of break down against some inferior opponents or play down to their level of opponent, where they would seem to put up good games against some good offenses, but then you have other really fringe starting quarterbacks coming in and playing like Pro Bowlers against you. I think that just kind of happened way too often, whether that was a reflection of mentality or effort or lack of technique in terms of tackling. I mean, there's a lot of things that could go into that, but I think this is the year where you have to show that you can lead the defense on your side as Zaire Franklin and turn things around and really negate those poor performances and prove that it wasn't. I mean, like Gus Bradley might have been part of the problem, but getting Lou Anarumo prove that you're not a part of the problem as well with what the past performances on defense have been like.
Yeah, and I mean, you're talking about. You're talking about a season where, yes, they fell to some teams that they shouldn't have, right?
Yeah.
But the game that stands out to me the most, and we've talked about this, and there's a damn good reason that we talk about it, is the Giants beating the brakes off this football team. By the way, the Colts, let me look here. Yeah. They didn't allow more than 45 points in a single game last year, and they allowed 45 points to rookie Tyrone Tracy in the backfield, rookie Malik Neighbors, who, no disrespect there, because I think Malik Neighbors is the next Jamar Chase. Okay, I really think he's going to be a superstar. But Drew Lock, baby, boy, he looked like he looked fantastic. I think that he had the most touchdowns in a single game of his entire career. And the best part about this, Noah, is that on the In the Trenches podcast, Zaire was like, I want to face a team that's terrible. I want to face a really bad team like the Giants.
Yeah.
And then the Giants go out there and beat the crap out of the Colts. So I think that less distraction. I think that I think if Jalen Carr lies, this is no offense to EJ Speed, but he led the entire linebacking core of the NFL in missed tackles. I think that if Jalen Carr lies can go out there and be a more secure cover linebacker, EJ Speed, that was not that's just not his jam. And if he can be a secure tackler and he can fly to the football, you're helping Zaire a lot. Also, the damn defensive line needs to not miss tackles. They need to plug those gaps. And that's why guys like, Neville Gallimore and Tim Smith are going to be critical. And then at the end of the day, Zaire has to continue to be that leader. Now, like you said, he is the dude. He's the general of the defense, really. And you're expecting him to lead.
Yeah.
And last year, no offense to Zaire, he wasn't really a leader. He was more of a guy that grabbed headlines because he was a little bit dramatic. And I think that he also was a problem in the locker room as well. So, this is a critical year, but look, I'll just say this. I don't know about you, Noah. I have no doubt in Zaire Franklin. I think that he plays great. I think he busts his tail to get to the football. Past 3 seasons, God, he's had over 160 tackles, which, look, when you make 173 tackles, you're going to miss a crap ton. You're just going to miss a bunch of tackles. What do you expect from him? Do you think that he's going to build on that season? Because so far he's been a guy that's just continued to elevate his play on the field, honestly.
Yeah, I feel good about it. I feel confident. I feel like The reason that the pressure is on him, because I think it falls more onto the defensive's performance as a whole, is going to be more reflective of him rather than just his individual performance. I think he needs to be accountable for more than just his individual performance, just based on the status that he has in the locker room and that C that's on his chest that a lot of people wanted ripped off. And I think that him being paired up with a guy like Jalen Carlisle, who I think complements him a little bit better, in terms of where Zaire Franklin and EJ Speed were kind of a lot the same. Maybe EJ Speed was a little bit flashier in the run game, but also a bigger liability in the pass game, where you didn't want to be in a position on defense where Zaire Franklin had to be your best cover linebacker. It's just not his game to be the best cover linebacker on the defense. He shouldn't be put in that position. It's not like he's that bad at it. I'd say he's just below average to average as a cover linebacker. But I think he's above average to really good as just like the Mike on a defense. And I think he's going to slide into that role a little bit better with a guy like Jalen Carlisle, assuming they're both healthy as his number 2.
Look, pretty much any NFL team would take a guy like Zaire Franklin.
Yeah.
Just saying. Okay. So we'll go ahead and get to this next guy. I had lost all faith in this man. And then I had to tell myself at the start of 2024, when he was answering questions about injuring Josh Downs, everyone was like, this guy's smug. This guy's such a smart ass. He doesn't care about Josh Downs. And really what it is that he doesn't get in front of the media very often. He's a pretty reserved guy. But this is safety Nick Cross. Okay. We'll just go ahead and knock it out real quick. His 2024 was insane. Mm-hmm. It was absolutely fantastic. You saw the reasons why Indianapolis traded up to get this guy from Maryland. Okay, so his first 2 seasons, he has 56 total tackles. He has no picks. Wait, 1 pick, 2 passes defended, no sacks. He has 1 tackle for loss. 2024, 3 interceptions, tied for the team lead with Julian Blackmon. 146 combined tackles for a safety, 87 by himself. He had 6 tackles for loss. He had 5 passes defended, a fumble forced. Dude was everywhere. Mm-hmm. And I think that those tackles are also an indication that there were a lot of missed tackles at the first and second level. But what did you make of Nick Cross's 2024, and why, Noah, did you put him on this list?
Yeah, and I think there was some missed tackles. I think that was across the board throughout the Colts defense.
Oh, they
where missed tackles were a little bit too high, even though Nick Cross was getting a lot of those tackle numbers. And I think he probably was put in some disadvantageous situations where linebackers are missing their run fits, and you've got a guy on you in the hole a little bit faster than you intended to be. You have to make that stop a little bit earlier. But that's also, I think, where Nick Cross should shine, and where I think he should be used in this Lou Anarumo defense is a little bit closer to the box, making plays on the ball, making plays on the ball carrier, and not being relied on so heavily in coverage. Just in terms of pressure that's going to be on, I think what really made me throw his name on here is the amount of turnover that we saw in the DB room. I think a similar thing could be said about Jalen Jones in terms of pressure that is going to be on these guys, young guys they've started, but they haven't started for super long. They're not like well entrenched in the NFL, and with a new defensive coordinator, a new defensive scheme, brand new defensive backs coaches, pretty much up and down from assistants to the head guy. It's different for them, and they have to prove themselves all over again. And you have to prove yourself in a different scheme. And in a scheme that is, by all accounts, more complex than what Gus Bradley was running. And at least I don't know if this is the case or if this was something that improved throughout the season, but at least early on in training camp, there was some real concerns with Nick Cross and his ability to communicate on the back end, or maybe not him specifically, but him being in the lineup and that communication, how that was meshing with that defensive back group was an issue early on in training camp, and it's why he couldn't seem to lock down the starting spot, and they were kind of throwing Julian Blackmon, Rodney Thomas, like rotating all these guys in at safety, trying to find something that worked. I think the plan early on was to have him back there at free safety, and that plan didn't work at strong safety. I think he just kind of, whether it was just not recognizing the talent that you had by the defensive coaching staff, he just kind of fell into his role there at strong safety by default, because that's the only place that we can play him, and he ended up excelling there. So that's to his credit. Is he finally found where he slotted in on the defense. It's just that now he has to do it all over again with Lou Anarumo's defense in a new scheme, and prove that he can be a starter in a new defense as well.
Yeah, and there's even more pressure on Cross, not just to build off of a career season, but not only is he in a new scheme, and not only does Lou Anarumo have a lot of things he's going to throw at you, but two more things. He's going to push you. Like, I'm not saying Gus Bradley. Look, every NFL coach, any level, they push their players to be great.
Mm.
But Lou Anarumo is a Staten Island type personality who is no nonsense. He's had success. He used to be fuddled Patrick Mahomes, for God's sake. So, like, this is a guy who knows what the hell he's doing. The other part of it is that a lot of his defense is predicated on how well his safeties and his cornerbacks play.
Yeah.
So more than ever, the attention is going to be on Nick Cross. Yes, guys like Leatu Latu and DeForest Buckner and Zaire, all those guys, the corners, they're going to have to play well. But now you're talking about Nick Cross being the incumbent starter of the two safeties, and now Cam Bynum comes in to join him. But I love how you brought that up. At one point, I was like, what are the Colts doing with Nick Cross? You know, they put him at free, they put him at strong, they put him at free, they put him at strong.
Chris Ballard went on and on about how he could play slot, and that, I mean, there was a lot of things that they tried to do with him. And that makes sense because he was such a young player coming into the league. He was 20 years old. He's still really young. I think he's 23 now, and it seems like he's been in the league for quite a bit longer than that. So, I mean, it was obviously going to take some time. He was a little bit of a project just because of how young he was and his raw athletic ability just to find where he slotted in. It's just, I think the Colts were a little bit too stubborn and trying to do too much with him and not just accepting the fact that, hey, maybe he could be a really, really good strong safety if we keep him where he's been excelling. But yeah, luckily they came to that realization at some point during training camp, and he was able to put together that performance they had last season.
Well, yeah, and the guy's kind of a bowling ball. He's like 6'1", 215. I mean, he's a strong safety. But I do want to get to a comment here. Teresa Willis Johnson, thank you so much for joining in and throwing a comment down. Nick Cross was so good because we were so bad. So what Teresa is referencing are the missed tackles we talked about. I think Nick Cross, I mean, you gotta give him credit because he was the guy who cleaned up those missed tackles. He could have been the guy that was missing those tackles, but he, more often than not, he got the job done. I mean, I loved how hard the guy played. He played like a guy who had something to prove.
Yeah.
Let's just say that. He played like a guy who was telling the NFL, I was put in the starting position for a reason, and I'm going to keep it. And, you know, I mean, yes, I think his biggest issue, I'm not even going to say pass coverage because he's okay at that. He's not a liability, but it's that communication. I mean, there were a couple times like you would see him, like there'd be a touchdown pass to a wide open guy, and he's like looking over at his cornerback. Cornerback's looking back at him, and he's like doing this, and you're like, wait, you're supposed to be the guy who's communicating here. And I think that's where Julian Blackmon definitely had an edge on Nick Cross. But so Nick Cross, huge season upcoming. This next guy, he's got even more pressure now, not just because he got a fifth-year option accepted, but because JT Tuimoloau got brought in the NFL draft in round 2, and that is Kwity Paye. So Kwity Paye has been, I think he's been above average for you. He's not bad. He's not great, but he's a starter. All right. So he could be worse, but man, you spent your 21st overall pick on him in the 2021 draft. You drafted this guy to be a cornerstone of your defense. Then you get Latu. Now you got Tuimoloau. What are your thoughts on Kwity Paye heading into year 5? He led the team in sacks last year.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason they picked up the fifth-year option on him. They saw something in him, and I don't think that. I mean, they probably believe there's a little bit more juice there than what they've seen in terms of pass rush. We know he's good in the run game. I don't know why just with the situation you were in with where you didn't have a lot at defensive end or at edge, where you just had Leatu Latu as a guy who's under contract past this offseason. You remedied that a little bit by going out and drafting Tuimoloau, so you've got two guys who you know will be on the roster. And I do think that makes it a little bit more difficult for a guy like Kwity Paye to prove that he can come back for a second contract when you have those two relatively high investments in Latu and Tuimoloau on the defensive edge, and then trying to justify paying whatever Kwity Paye is going to end up costing them to come back on this contract. So I think by nature of having a lot of pressure. I think anybody that's going into a contract year is going to have a ton of pressure. But Kwity Paye even more so because they've got two young guns on the edge that they've drafted pretty highly. And then really all those other options. I mean, it's not just Kwity Paye that's going to be hitting free agency for the Colts in terms of in-house guys on the edge. You've got Tyquan Lewis, Samson Ebukam. Uh, yeah, Isaiah Land's going to be coming up too. I mean, you've got other guys who are probably more role players, and the pressure's not going to be on them so much. Whereas Kwity Paye is going to have to come out and show in a contract year that he deserves to retain his role as a starter going forward, even with the young guys on the roster.
Yeah, and drafting Leatu Latu was really, really the big one because you know Samson Ebukam, by all regards, I was so unbelievably impressed with what he did in his first year. But you go down with an injury. Kwity Paye is leaned on to do more than ever. Now, look, I mean, 4 sacks, 6 sacks, 8.5 sacks, 8 sacks. He's done a decent
Yeah.
job at defensive end. But the thing that really crushes Kwity Paye is, look, it's as analysts, we're on this show not talking about sack numbers. All right, people get obsessed with sack
Mhm.
totals. I would take a defensive end that has 8 sacks every season, but he is putting hellacious pressure on a quarterback over a guy like Yannick Ngakoue in 2022, where you have almost 10 sacks and you're not anything other than a cleanup guy. So that's why Samson Ebukam was so integral, is because he was a run defender who put pressure on you and sacked you.
Yeah.
So Kwity Paye needs to be more like Samson Ebukam. I'm just going to say it. Like, he needs to have that kind of year this year where he either eclipses 10 sacks, gets 10 sacks, or he's at 9.5. But what really helps Kwity Paye's case is he is an incredible run defender. He's able to set the edge, seal it, not get put off and onto the inside so a running back just scoots right on by. He's a strong SOB who can really, really set the edge. That's critical. But, man, I think that when they took JT Tuimoloau, I think that they were saying, look, this guy can also defend the run. This guy can also get to the quarterback. I mean, he had like 12 plus sacks in his last year at Ohio State. Absolute menace. So do you think Kwity Paye, knowing he's got that 5th-year option, do you think that he is going to have a career year? Because by all regards, again, he's just done nothing but seemingly incrementally get better every year. It seems like if the numbers are correct and the trajectory is accurate, I mean, he's going to best himself. He's going to best what he did last season.
Yeah, there's certainly a possibility, and I guess it depends on how that defensive line rotation shapes up and how the scheme's going to be looking with the personnel that they have. It's really going to be hard to project against these past years with the Gus Bradley defense just because of the differences that you're going to have along the defensive line. Really trying to project those stat numbers might be completely different because you're in a new scheme. But I think he's facing an uphill battle a little bit because of the rotation that they have in these guys. I mean, assuming these guys stay healthy and go into the season with guys like Tyquan Lewis and Ebukam and Tuimoloau and Latu, and him being like primarily, maybe not primarily, but like one of your best run defenders. You want him on the field in rush downs or run downs. So he's not going to get all the opportunities that maybe some other defensive ends around the league get in terms of pass rush, because you have other guys who are more specialized pass rushers to come in, and Latu and Ebukam, some of these guys that you can bring in on these pass rush downs to take some of those snaps away. So maybe that opportunity for production is not going to be there as much as he has seen in past years. But and then on top of that, I think you have 4 years of tape on a guy. You kind of expect to see in year 5 what you've seen in years 1 through 4. So I know that trajectory of his statistics going up a little bit, that's always going to be a little bit natural, but I think that does have a tendency to plateau at a certain point in a career. So I wouldn't expect it to just shoot up really, really that drastically. As far as I'm concerned, I'm pretty much expecting going into this year of year 5 of Kwity Paye to see pretty much exactly what we saw in year 4 of Kwity Paye, which is good. And I think it's worth what they're paying him on that 5th-year option. I just don't know that they're going to be able to or willing to like engage in a bidding war for that type of player if it comes to free agency next year.
Yeah, and real quick, even in his second year in 2022, he only played 12 games,
Yeah.
but he got 6 sacks. So if you do the math, he has 8.5. Like, so that's pretty much that might be the guy Kwity Paye is he might be an 8 sack a season guy, which look, you can do a lot worse than that, I'll tell you. So, but this next one is really, really interesting. And I love this tag title that you put on this. Wide receivers not named Josh Downs. I'm just going to point blank ask you, explain that.
Yeah, so I mean, there was a couple of guys on there. You
I
mentioned
love
it. You suggested Alec Pierce, and I think that was the first name that I thought of when I was thinking of wide receivers who have a lot to prove or are going to be under the most pressure. Again, by virtue of the contract year thing, and then you have a guy in A.D. Mitchell, what kind of waiting in the wings. Then you've got that starts the A.D. Mitchell conversation where you're talking about these second year players who really have an opportunity to win a starting job. I think the conversation about Alec Pierce and A.D. Mitchell kind of goes hand in hand. Like I think A.D. Mitchell needs to perform well in order for Alec Pierce not to get the second contract. I think Alec Pierce has to perform well in order for him to get that second contract. I think there's a lot of like that battle is not just for this season's playing time. It's for what it's going to be going forward. And throwing that tag on there, wide receivers not named Josh Downs. I think Josh Downs is I think we've not been shy about saying we think he's wide receiver 1 in terms of talent and expect him to be wide receiver 1 in terms of production that we're going to see this upcoming season. And then, the Michael Pittman conversation, I think, is something you've got to have where he's a guy coming back from injury. I think a lot of that pressure that he would have had is being alleviated a little bit because of that narrative last year of, he was playing through that back injury, which I think everybody is respecting the hell out of him for that, playing out of that or playing through what he played through last season. So maybe there's not a ton of pressure for him to come out and perform right away. But I think at a certain point you have to show that you're. I mean, he's being paid. I mean, it's kind of like a low end wide receiver 1, but he's being paid the most of any wide receiver on this offense. So you kind of have to expect that kind of production from him. And I'm not sure you're going to get that with a guy like Josh Downs on the roster. I think there's 2 years left on Michael Pittman's deal, 1 year left on Alec Pierce's deal. Josh Downs is really the one who I think is solidified there. So that pecking order from Josh Downs onward, I think, is something that's going to have to be shaken out this year in terms of not just training camp, but as we go out through the entire season of whether Michael Pittman's a long-term guy, whether Alec Pierce is a long-term guy, and whether or not A.D. Mitchell's even progressed to the point where he can be relied on as a role player in his second year, because he really wasn't even reliable enough to be that last season.
Yes, and to hit on these guys real quick here, Michael Pittman Jr., he's still the staple of the offense. Last year, he still almost led the team in receptions with a fractured lower back.
Yeah.
Led the team in he was second in receiving yards. You go to Alec Pierce here. Alec Pierce is in a contract season, and yes, all right, he was. This isn't biased. This is just fact. He was the definition and the staple last season of a deep threat in the NFL. Okay, I mean, led the league in receptions or yards per catch, 7 touchdowns out of 37 catches, which is basically 1 out of 5 catches is a score. He had 32 first downs, which means every time he catches it, damn near, the guy's going to secure a first down. 824 receiving yards. But here's the thing. A.D. Mitchell has far more that he can defeat a defense with than Alec Pierce. And if he figures it out, it's going to be rough, I think, for Alec Pierce, because I think Pierce is who he is. I think he's that deep threat that is that one. He's that post guy that when he puts that foot in the ground and he turns it upfield, you're screwed. He's very fast. We saw it on that Anthony Richardson touchdown. Everyone wets their pants over Richardson's throw. Alec Pierce toasted both of those Texans defenders, absolutely left them hilariously in the dust. So this is a guy that's got the speed. He's got the deep ball ability, but he's not a route runner. He's not an underneath guy. He's not an intermediate guy who's going to run these crisp, separation type routes. A.D. Mitchell can get you underneath. He can get you with his feet. He can get you deep. He's explosive. If you get quarterback competency mixed with the fact that, he isn't T-Rex, T-Rex arming these catches, and he's a little less afraid of contact, which, for the love of God, AD, it's football. you're wearing pads. He's got every edge over Pierce. I hate to say it. He really does. But Alec Pierce, as long as he's got Richardson, he's going to excel. God help him if he gets Daniel Jones. Because Daniel Jones doesn't like to throw those deep balls. It's going to be very interesting. And then lastly, of course, is A.D. Mitchell. If he, kind of going back to the AP conversation, if A.D. Mitchell can build on his talents, he's going to be a threat. Even Reggie Wayne said he is one of the best. At one point, he said he's one of the best separators he's seen in the NFL.
Yeah.
And you've also got Josh Downs, who is an incredible separator. I'm telling you, man, I know people don't want to hear this, but if A.D. Mitchell figures it out, it's going to be hard for Pierce. I just think so, especially if Jones starts. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's rough. I mean, Alec Pierce,
he played great.
He does one thing well, but he does it really, really well, better than most players in the NFL, and that also do that thing in terms of the percentage of those deep balls that he was coming down with, and average yards per reception. There's the ability to add that explosiveness to the offense. And two, that thing that he does well is something that the Colts really value, and pretty much every team in the NFL really, really value. In terms of creating those explosive plays. So he's got those two things going for him. But yeah, entering year 4 of his career, it's like kind of like what we said with Kwity Paye, where maybe we've seen what we're going to see out of Alec Pierce, whereas Kwity Paye is like this solid starting defensive end who's not going to wow you with his sack production, but he's going to be a consistent run defender and very reliable and get you some pressures. Alec Pierce is going to be a guy who's going to win those deep balls and come down with those contested catches, but I don't know if we're really expecting to see a ton of development in terms of what he's able to do underneath and in the intermediate passing game. But I mean, still, like I mentioned, that's a super reliable or super valuable skill for him to have. And you'd hate to see that go, because I think even though A.D. Mitchell has some of that capability to be that deep threat, we have to see it in the NFL. I know we saw it in college, but we didn't really see that happen in the NFL. We didn't really see a ton of production really on any level in the NFL. So really, to feel good about moving on from that super valuable skill that Alec Pierce has, you have to see something from A.D. Mitchell in terms of his ability to produce in the NFL.
Oh, yeah. I mean, AD has to have a hell of a sophomore season, okay? Because that deep ball ability, yes, it's a singular skill. But as soon as you throw 2 deep balls, there was a game where he had 3 catches for like 131 yards. That absolutely puts immense pressure on a defense, and it makes them confused, because now they have to extend their coverage. And with a team like the Colts, even when Joey Flax was out there freaking commanding the team, you get to run the football just constantly. So we'll see, but I threw this one in at the very end because I think that there is pressure on this young man. And it's because of where he was selected and the state of this position last year. It was a pitfall, a void. That's Tyler Warren. So Tyler Warren is supposed to be the answer that the Colts have been searching for.
Yeah.
And it's very fitting because not long ago with JJ Stankovic, he's a Colts.com writer, breaking down some film, was Jack Doyle on Tyler Warren, the last really solid tight end the Colts, consistent tight end that the Colts had. What are your thoughts on Tyler Warren? I will say the bar's pretty low.
Yeah.
It's pretty low for Warren.
Yeah, just in terms of what he has to outproduce, you're right on there. I mean, the worst position group or skill group in the NFL were the Colts tight ends last season. So you got to come out and, I mean, I'm not sure he really has to put much effort into really beating that production that you got out of the tight ends last season. But I think there's probably it might not be internal with the Colts, but I think at least externally with the fan base, he is facing a lot of expectations in terms of the immediate impact that at least Colts fans are expecting him to have on the offense. I mean, we know Indiana sports fans love a white tight end with a mullet who wore number 44. I mean, they're going to latch onto that guy, and I mean, and he was that guy. I mean,
especially the mullet.
Yeah, they were. I mean, everybody was clamoring for Tyler Warren. He was the obvious fit to the Colts before draft season even started. So expectations are going to be high outwardly for him. I think internally they're going to be a little bit more patient. but at the same time, it's hard to say that they're going to be a little bit more patient because we know that Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen are really riding the hot seat this year. So they're going to, they did draft him because they wanted an immediate impact. It's just going to be a question of how big that impact ends up being.
Yeah, and to make it very brief, since we're at the end of the show here, Tyler Warren, people are probably expecting him to be this guy that's going to go out there and haul in, 70 catches for 800 yards, 10 receiving touchdowns, maybe a couple more with his feet.
Yeah.
Look, two things. There are a lot of mouths to feed on that offense. We just went over the wide receiving core. Okay, so many. And if A.D. Mitchell takes off, you got 5 or 4 big mouths to feed there. The other factor is that whether it's Richardson or Jones, you've got a running quarterback, an athletic quarterback there, and you've got Jonathan freaking Taylor in the backfield, who, by the way, averaged 28 carries a game in his last 5 games. Warren, his impact is not necessarily going to be – it shouldn't be judged just by his catches and his yards and his touchdowns. The dude's going to be blocking.
Yeah.
Okay, the dude's going to be doing chips and leak routes. He's going to be doing all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
If you can even scrape out 45 catches from Tyler Warren for 500 yards, 5 receiving touchdowns, and maybe 1 on the ground with an extra 70 rushing yards, that's a great rookie season based off of a Colts tight end, the offense and the situation. What are your thoughts? I mean, again, the whole tight end group out of all 4 guys had 39 catches last season. If you can even get over 40 with a rookie tight end, I think that's a success in the Colts offense.
Yeah, and you're smart to bring up his ability as a blocker is something that's going to play a huge role in terms of the way he's going to impact the offense. But I think something that's even going to be even harder to like quantify and try to put into words of how he's affecting the offense is going to be their ability to stay multiple while he's in the huddle, and you're not telegraphing the plays that you're running by dragging out Mo Cox and Drew Ogletree as your 2 tight ends. I mean, you just throw Tyler Warren in there as your tight end, you're really keeping open the threat of running and passing within that same personnel group. And I think that's going to give Shane Steichen a lot of freedom to call whatever he wants in a lot of situations. And that's really not something we're ever going to be able to quantify that impact that he's having on the game in that sense. Only Shane Steichen and the offensive staff and people in that meeting room are going to be able to understand the way that that's affecting the game. But it is going to have an impact in the way that he's going to open up the playbook a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. I'm very, very excited to see what Tyler Warren's going to do for this team. But yeah, guys, that is our show. We thank you so much for joining. It was a pleasure. Don't forget to like the Horseshoe Huddle on Facebook. We're always happy to get supporters here. Follow the Indianapolis Colts on SI on X. We are at Colts_SI. And then, of course, subscribe to the Horseshoe Huddle on YouTube and click the bell to turn on notifications so you don't miss anything. Because once we start getting into training camp, there might be some good stuff that we might have to break with. Want to listen? No problem. We are everywhere. We're on Apple Podcasts. Subscribe to us there, on Spotify, wherever else you listen. So, everyone, we hope that you have a wonderful 4th of July weekend.
Mm-hmm.
I will actually be out of town. Noah, it's going to be July 3rd. We want everybody to celebrate with their family and friends, throw back some beers, watch some fireworks, have an absolutely great time. Sit in a lawn chair, especially if you're in the Midwest, because that's a thing in the Midwest. Yeah. But yeah, thank you so much, everybody. Enjoy your Thursday. Enjoy your Friday. We're going to be taking the latter part of this week off, and we will see you all again on Monday, fresh after 4th of July weekend. Enjoy it, and we will talk more Colts football with all of you.